Hello and welcome to the Allison Supply Chains podcast. This is the October 2025 episode covering the latest news concerning third-party cyber risk management and digital supply chain risk. Each month, we pick a few of the industry's most interesting stories and discuss them. If you like what you hear or prefer to read over listening, you can also find these stories in print form. You can join over 15,000, it is over 15,000 now, other subscribers and read the Allison Supply Chains newsletter every month. To subscribe, you can go to, and this has moved since last month, you can go to tenchysecurity.com, click on Insights and News, and then Allison Supply Chains newsletter. I did notice that moved, and I changed the script. Also, if you're listening to this, why not subscribe? You're already here. The button's right there. Just click it. All right, let's get this show started. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, founder of the Defenders Initiative, and joining me is Alexandre Sieira, the CTO and co-founder of Tenchi Security. How you doing, Alexandre?
I'm fine. Happy to be here. We're recording this on a Friday. It's been a long week, but this is super refreshing always to discuss the news.
I think it's a good way to end the week here. It's so my vibes, it's interesting enough. It's a small talk that me and Marianne were having before we hit record here. I was in Barcelona, my first time to Spain, which is where my last name, Sanabria, comes from. And I did not go that part of Spain. There is actually a Pueblo de Sanabria and a Lago de Sanabria in the northwest of Spain. We did not go there. We were just in Barcelona. And considering everything going on in the U.S., we were joking about staying indefinitely and just not coming home.
I can understand that. So I don't know if you know this. I'm actually also a Spanish citizen. My parents were born in the northwest of Spain, in Galicia, actually. So yeah, I completely understand. So every time I go, I want to stay as well. The food is awesome. The vibe is amazing. I love the people. Depending on where you are, the weather is super interesting. Depending
Yeah.
where you are, it's a bit miserable, but overall, amazing country to be in. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep. We had to wear jackets. It was cold. So
Yeah.
September, it got down into the, I guess it would be teens in Celsius or the 50s in Fahrenheit. But yeah, jacket weather at night at least for sure. Yeah, and the other thing I have for the vibe section is the just the madness of the AI companies trading around $100 billion like it's like IOUs, like $100 billion, $300 billion IOUs getting passed around. So that the bubble vibes are increasing.
It's very circular, and everyone gets their share prices increased, and everyone's just the same money
Mhm.
circling around, and somehow the investors think this is a good thing. I don't know. Yes. Doesn't mean the technology isn't useful. Is it useful enough for the evaluations? Probably not. But yeah, it's super weird to watch, definitely. On my part, I have a reason to be excited about something, which is we're recording this in the middle of October, and coming on early November. Actually, I think it's the 5th of November. Remember the 5th of November. We're going to have the Tenchi conference, which is our yearly event, which is entirely content focused. We barely speak of Tenchi and our product at all on the main stage. It's mostly geared towards having industry experts, CISOs, board members for large regulated companies. We're bringing in Dave Lewis, which you probably are very familiar with, currently at One Password, which is a company I love, by
Yeah,
the way.
he's going
We're
to be
happy
on
customers.
Enterprise Security Weekly next week.
He runs an
Yeah,
amazing
he's
podcast, Chasing Entropy,
yeah.
that interviewed a lot of
One
people we
Password
know
is
and love.
actually One Password is actually a sponsor of Enterprise Security Weekly.
Right. So amazing person. And AJ Yon, which we did an episode here about SOC 2, is coming to
Yeah,
speak at the event, plus a lot of folks from Latin America. We're expanding
yeah.
beyond Brazil this edition. We're bringing people from Argentina, from Mexico, from Chile, from Peru. So it's going to be super interesting. And anyone, we still have a few seats left. It's it's more than 500 people already enrolled. We probably are the largest TPCRM only conference in the world.
Oh, neat.
It's on
Love
Luma.
to
We
hear
can
that.
share the links on the show notes. Anyone wants to enroll, come down to Sao Paulo. Amazing venue. We'd love to have you.
Yeah, let me make some notes there. I will add some links. Maybe I'll throw it up on the screen so people can check that out. Yeah, so I imagine you'll have to have some translators there,
We
because
will
it's
have simultaneous translation to and from Brazilian Portuguese, English, and Spanish. So the Spanish is
yeah,
new.
very cool.
We've always had from the very beginning Portuguese and English. We're adding
Hmm.
Spanish now.
Yeah, I went to two conferences in Armenia earlier this year, and for the larger one that was put on by the Central Bank of Armenia, they had translation to and from English and Russian, because most people in Armenia speak Russian, having been part of having been a Soviet state.
Makes sense. Scary, but
All
makes
right, let's
sense.
jump into it. So, yeah, I guess I don't know. Maybe this is an end cap on our discussions about Scattered Spider and Shiny Hunters and all these breaches that have occurred due to them targeting third parties. But we do have a story where apparently they've written something saying that they've accomplished their objectives, whatever that means, whatever those objectives were. Making a lot of money. I don't know what else those objectives might be, but they say goodbye, which I think we've seen this from attackers before, and they just come back under a different name. They just go behind a bush and change their masks, right, and pop back out. It's like a
Yeah.
Scooby Doo cartoon or something.
Yes. Yes. There's nothing more reliable and trustworthy than the image that criminal gangs try to present of themselves, right? So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We can trust them, I'm sure. Yeah.
yes. Yes. Actually, that's the first thing, right? So it's interesting to try to read something out of this and try to understand like the psychology and what those people are thinking and how they're trying to present themselves can carry some threat intelligence level information here. But the first thing is we can't trust what they're saying, as you're saying. Those people have rug pull moments where they pretend like they simply disappear and they take the money from even their own co-conspirators, right? Because there are entire ecosystems where there's initial access brokers and then there's the people that write the ransomware, the ransomware operators, and then you have the affiliates, which are the ones that are actually doing the intrusions and
Yeah.
collecting the money, and then there's the money is split among all those three parties. So at some point, an affiliate might have a credit with the ransomware operator, and then the ransomware operator does a rug pull and disappears with the money that was owed to the affiliate, or vice versa. The affiliate collects the ransom but does not. It's the thieves are robbing each other as well, so we have to be very very careful, right? Um, but I don't know what if you like I read the communication they put out, right? And the first thing I remembered, and I keep mentioning this book, which I still think every security professional should read this book, is that book by Dan Ariely called The Honest Truth About Dishonesty, right? And the thing that Ariely says is the largest predictor of how much people are going to cheat in general and how likely they are to cheat and how much cheating they're going to do is their ability to justify even to themselves that what they're doing is actually right. Like, hey, I'm funneling money out of the company that I work for. Oh, but they treat me super badly, right? They don't pay me enough or whatever. So I'm just getting it back to them. I'm the Robin Hood. I'm just making things right. The way you justify and so as you said, we've met our objectives, but that's not the part that drew my attention. The thing that really caught my eye was them saying, like, yeah, we're fighting against the big companies like Salesforce or Google. Like, if you
Yeah,
read
we're the
this,
heroes. We're not the criminals, right?
we're the champions of virtue, like sticking it to the man, right? And we're going to achieve the victory against the oppressors. Right, because you're taking that money and donating it to charity. You're not buying a Ferrari for yourself or something, right? And paying for expensive dinners or vacations at the Black Sea resort or whatever, right? No, that's not what people are doing. They're not sending it to charity, right? But that the scary thing is thinking those people to some extent might even believe this BS they're spewing, because that's probably how they rationalize doing what they do every day, which, let's not kid ourselves, might involve people losing their livelihoods, people being unable to pay for health insurance. We've seen hospitals being impacted. We've seen, so the amount of mental gymnastics those people have to make to justify what they're doing is just bizarre. And that's the
Yeah.
vibe I got reading this document. I don't know if you felt something different here, but
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, there's still, I think for these guys, with all the taunting of law enforcement, I think that's really what's it seems like is driving them, because this is what they latch onto. This is what they talk about, is this kind of cat and mouse. They seem to be enjoying this cat and mouse game with law enforcement, saying, hey, that person you arrested in France was the wrong person, and calling the law enforcement names and things like that. And you haven't discovered the other dozen billion-dollar company breaches that we've done that hasn't even hit the news yet. So they're bragging, they're taunting, So I think, maybe it isn't just about the money for some of these folks. Maybe it is the, hey, I'm just somebody at a coffee shop, or in a flat somewhere, hacking these giant companies. Look at what the little guy can do. So they're getting a lot of drive out of that. I think it's just this David versus Goliath, kind of twisted David versus Goliath thing, because they're just one person and this is a large billion-dollar company. They feel like they're the good guy because they shouldn't be able to do what they're doing. These companies should have better security. So I think that's some of the mental gymnastics going on here.
absolutely. I don't know if there's and that's the problem with spending a lot of time doing attribution and studying the threat actors. I think it's more useful to understand their techniques and the way they do things and try to protect against those. But understanding who they are as people, if you are, law enforcement, then absolutely that's what you need to focus on. But
Yeah.
I just feel like for most
If you want to
companies,
catch them.
because you want to catch them, right? You want to
Right.
be sure that those people are punished, they're caught and punished, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because it becomes a deterrent. And then we go into the
Yeah,
entire problem
exactly.
of some of those people are, which is not the case with those kids, like the calm kids, which are the two groups that we're talking about. They are actually
Mm-hmm.
like in the US, in the UK, a lot of them. So there's a good chance of catching them, and law enforcement has in the past, right? And I hope they continue to. But for typical organizations, spending a lot of time thinking about that might not be the best use of your time. It's much more, let's
Yeah.
learn from their past attacks, learn how they operate, and make sure you yourself are protected against them, right? Which probably is a good segue into story number two.
It is, and they do mention, so in this very long goodbye that they post, they do taunt the fact that they claim to have done Jaguar Land Rover, as well as other yet unnamed breaches, and I think they list 10. They say there's something like 10, so maybe we'll have to continue talking about them in the future. But Jaguar Land Rover is certainly one of the biggest ones that we've seen. We don't know a lot about the attack, so I did some digging before this, and all I can find are assumptions just based on who the threat actor might be, on how they got in. There is a mention somewhere that it might have been something that was exploited on the edge of the network, but we know that Scattered Spider does prefer to use social engineering to get in. But they are opportunistic, so maybe it's a combination of things. Maybe it's an exploit. But I think mostly what we have to talk about here is just the, automotive manufacturers are some of the most connected industries. Probably aviation as well here, right? Depend on these huge just networks of third parties, of suppliers. I think it's the car that depends on suppliers the least, I've heard, is Tesla, which creates 70% of their own stuff for the car. But still, it's 30% where they're depending on suppliers. Like, if you want an airbag, you have to go to Mexico, right? Like, it's just not made in other countries. Like, I think, maybe in Asia there's also some manufacturers, but here in North America, most suppliers get them from Mexico. So it's a very distributed network and supply chain, and they're hurting. The ones who are really dependent, and you have both upstream and downstream, right? So you've got the companies that make parts for the cars, but then you have the repair shops, the dealerships who depend on cars getting built and distributed for them to be able to, well, and also like the online repair
parts.
manual. If you're a repair shop, in a lot of cases, you can't get the firmware to update the car. You can't even get to the online repair manual when Jaguar Land Rover is down, because a lot of that stuff is online. It's updated in real time, and all of it was down.
And your car needs new parts because something broke and the car needs to be fixed. And then you, as the owner of that car, there's no parts available. Like Jaguar Land Rover can't either produce it or sell it or whatever it is. And it's a huge impact, right? And as you said, huge impact. And we don't appreciate, like, Jaguar Land Rover, like the automotive industry in general, but Jaguar Land Rover has a big share of that in the UK. Like, there were measurable impacts on the balance of payments, right? The amount of exports and imports and the amount of foreign currency that enters the country. Like, the finance ministry was involved in the discussions because this is such a huge company that represents such a big chunk of the UK's exports.
One of the biggest employers in the UK, I think. Yeah.
And they are one of the biggest employers, probably just themselves. And if you include the supply chain, even more so. So actually, there were like suppliers that were on the brink of just going bankrupt, and people that are being furloughed and not being paid because they're paid by shifts. Companies that supply parts to Jaguar Land Rover, they're not being paid either because the payment systems are offline. So even outstanding invoices and payments that were due were not made in the correct dates, and because they're not selling new parts because Jaguar is not making new cars, right? And so on and so forth. So the repercussions there, again, for people's livelihoods is incredible. And that probably includes providers not just in the UK, but everywhere in the world, because those supply chains are supranational, right? So they're not just constrained into the UK. So that's why the government got involved, actually. And I'm thinking you're going to get into that next. But that was like a huge economic hit.
Yeah, so exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, I've got some of the estimates here. It's something like 200,000 jobs impacted just in the UK, and some of those suppliers are not in the UK, so it's even bigger than that. A lot of these employees being furloughed without pay or laid off entirely, and the reports were around $5 billion in damages, but that I still don't think they're fully up and running. So we're not going to know what that full number is going to be for months, if not years, if there's lawsuits and things like that, because Jaguar Land Rover did not have a cyber insurance policy. So I'm thinking that that may be seen as negligence. That may be seen as a reason to sue the company. And this is a company owned by Tata Motors, which Tata is a huge organization. In fact, they own some consulting services that have been in the news also that we've talked about. So kind of a coincidence that the company, parent company that owns Jaguar Land Rover, which is headquartered in the UK, is an Indian company that also owns the consulting services that some of these attackers have had an easy time of social engineering. So kind of a comes around full circle.
So actually, that's something that caught my attention here, right? And that has a very interesting TPCRM angle. As you said, Jaguar Land Rover is owned by the Tata Group, which is this huge conglomerate out of India, from the Tata family, and they own, as you said, Tata Motors, which makes cars and owns other car brands abroad, but they also own TCS, which is Tata Consulting Services. And despite the name, they don't just do consultancy, they also do like business process outsourcing and IT infrastructure
Mhm.
operations, right? You're going to remember that Tata Consulting Services was the one that was pointed as one of the entry points on the Marks and Spencers and co-op incidents in the UK around the same time the Jaguar Land Rover was compromised. And again, this we're not certain. There's no confirmation. There's no public information saying this, but it's believed in the industry from what we've heard that those are related. That's also the way, possibly, by which those attackers, which are from those uh, lapses, scattered hunters, spiders, spider hunters, whatever it is,
Yeah.
one of those from the com were the ones that did it here as well. Just they claim to be right. And then when the incident occurred, do you know? And Jaguar Land Rover had like hundreds of millions of pounds contract to outsource their IT infrastructure in an IT modernization project with TCS. So the
Mhm.
first thing from a TPCRM perspective, how independent and how thorough was Jaguar Land Rover allowed to be when assessing if TCS was the most secure supplier, given that the Tata Group owns JLR, right? So that's one of the things where we keep telling people that TPCRM or TPRM in general is about power dynamics between first and third parties. In this case, the third party is probably more powerful in that discussion than the first party
Yeah.
because the owner of the first party is interested in getting that revenue into one of their other subsidiaries, right? So I,
Exactly.
I, I can't say for a fact that this impacted or not the decision making. I find it highly likely that the TPRM process there was under a lot of political pressure to make
Yeah. I
sure
mean,
to allow TCS to be the chosen provider.
and to be a little bit more plain with my language, if you're Jaguar Land Rover and you're owned by Tata, do you even get a choice of whether or not to use TCS?
Yes,
Right?
precisely.
I, I doubt it. And the UK has noticed a pattern here with TCS. And so now they're asking TCS some uncomfortable questions, like how many other US based companies are you providing services for? And what is the total value of those service contracts? So it looks like the UK is trying to limit some damage here, some future damage and some liability. I'm not sure I've ever seen a government blacklist a services provider, for quality of their services before. But
Uh,
these kinds of questions that the UK government is asking right now makes it seem like they're moving in that direction.
I think part of the reason here is that the UK government already had a financial stake in the security of Jaguar Land Rover and those other companies, because this
Yeah.
has political implications, right? Because those are well-known brands that the public at large, the Marks and Spencers Co-op and now Jaguar Land Rover, like it might seem that, hey, our government doesn't have its affairs in order. They're not doing proper supervision of those companies that are too big to fail, right? But the other thing is that the UK government used an existing program to provide loan guarantees to large exporters, and they offered 1.5 billion pounds sterling, or about 2 billion US dollars, purportedly to prop up their supply chain. But again, this money is being loaned to JLR by a bank, and what the UK government is doing is they're saying they're a backstop. Like if JLR fails to pay that loan back, the UK government will foot up to 80% of that bill and make the bank whole, right? It's not like they're giving the money themselves, but there's a very happy bank providing a very low risk loan.
Yeah.
JLR is probably
Right.
getting good rates because the risk is low on that money, and because they're a big company that has the capacity to pay. I'm just not entirely sure how much of that money is actually going to end up in the hands of the suppliers and how much DLR is going to use themselves. I'm not sure what kind of oversight exists for this, because the existing program did not have that conditional built in that the UK government known, as far as I can tell. Having said that, JLR did put out a press release saying that they're paying, not only paying outstanding invoices with their suppliers, but also paying some suppliers in advance or in much shorter payment terms that they had before, precisely to help them compensate for the losses they've had so far, and help them adjust their cash flow, right? But here's the thing that I'm thinking here. Um, so JLR is owned by Tata. They were outsourcing their IT to TCS, Tata Consulting Service. And then when they had an
Yeah,
incident,
I
do
see
you
the
know
I
who
see
they
the note that you're getting to, and I did not know that.
so do you know who they called when they got a breach to investigate the incident?
Not Mandiant.
Not Mandiant, TCS as well. How convenient. How convenient.
How is that not a
Maybe
conflict of interest?
so now TCS is being called to do an independent investigation and recovery effort of an incident that allegedly was created
They
by a
caused.
failure of security of the right hand of TCS is investigating an incident and being paid probably very handsomely, including with some of that money that JLR is getting for that loan, because of a problem that allegedly was created by the left hand of TCS, which was the one
Yeah,
handling, I don't know, service desk or IT transformation or whatever. So, yes, conflict of interest comes to mind. So, how thorough and how independent will that investigation be when it tries to find the root causes? Right.
yeah.
So, yeah, that is,
I think the government will probably get involved here. You know, like when Equifax happened. You know that the House put together a subcommittee to investigate because it impacted more than 50%. I think it was like 80% of adult Americans impacted by that credit bureau breach. So I would not be surprised to see the UK say we're going to order an independent investigation into this, particularly if they're having to secure this enormous loan, right?
because Tata has the money to provide something like that to JLR.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, the UK government had to step in and possibly put taxpayer money at risk. I think it's rather reasonable that they look into the conflict of interest in this whole thing and maybe hold Tata responsible. I don't know. But I think there would be a lot of political pressure for them to look into this, and it might not be misplaced.
Yeah.
So this is a weird scenario here. And again, for TPCRM, uh, what do you do when one of those scenarios comes around? How do you protect yourself? How do you get the political buy-in to be able to say, even though this company is part of our group, they have security issues? Do you, as a TPCRM professional, have to have people accept risks in that scenario, even if you're not going to win that fight? Um, so that's a tricky situation. That's maybe a what if scenario people should be playing in their heads, depending on who their company is owned by, right? Because there's conflict of interest, and there's also the concept of moral hazard, depending on how this goes.
Yeah.
Because I think JLR, they had the money to withstand this cash flow problem. Some of their suppliers didn't. And they can borrow much more cheaply than their smaller suppliers. And the UK government gave them
Yeah.
loans and not their suppliers, right? And they took Tata off the hook from doing that themselves and helping them financially if they needed it, right? So there's a moral hazard here, right? Involved. Like you could have someone might end up being rewarded for having an incident financially in the
Yeah.
Tata group, right? So that's the thing. They were in a position to control the company and influence what their security budget was, but at the same time, if a security incident happens, they get paid for the nose to do incident response. Like that's. I'm not saying that happened, but I'm saying it's a weird state of affairs. If you think about it, there's a potential here again, based
Yeah.
on public information and common sense, which might be wrong, for a moral hazard situation that something
And
like a government would have to step in to correct.
and the same thing happened with Equifax, by the way. Equifax was allowed to offer identity protection to the victims of its own breach. And some percentage of that free 1 year of identity protection would have converted into a paying into a paid relationship. So they were allowed to profit off their own breach as well. So there is it's happened before, and it looks like it's happening again here. So before we move on to the next story, I just want to mention that the story we're pulling from for the first one that we discussed, the goodbye from Shiny Hunter Scattered Spider Lapsus, was from a good friend of mine who I've never met in real life. I don't even know their real name, but Descent Doe, who runs databreaches.net. A lot of good information there, and Descent sends me interesting stuff. Sometimes request my opinion on things. And the second story we were pulling from The Guardian, and that write-up was from Jasper Jolly and Dan Milmo. This episode is brought to you by Zanshin, the innovative SaaS solution for third-party cyber risk management that's disrupting the market with a cooperative, continuous, and comprehensive approach. Zanshin is the first product to allow first parties to gain true visibility into their third parties in a non-intrusive way. Gain a deep understanding of how secure your third parties are in key areas like cloud security, endpoint security, identity and access management, and at-risk encryption. Visit Tenchi at tenchisecurity.com to schedule a demo or free trial and see for yourself how enterprise customers are able to reduce third-party risk by 80% or more in just a few weeks. All right, the third story here, I kind of wanted to revisit, it just kind of popped out at me looking at all these headlines. There's a lot in the newsletter this month, and a lot of them are discussing direct losses from breaches. And back in the day, there were attempts to try to understand the size of breaches and the impacts of breaches from the number of records that were lost. And Ponemon is kind of infamous for coming up with a amount per record on what breaches cost. But now that attackers are targeting operations and revenue directly, we're seeing, much more direct losses here. It's not, it was kind of hard to figure out how much a breach costs an organization, because there would be some class action lawsuits. They would have to provide identity protection at their own cost. They might have to compensate a bank for having to reissue 1 million credit cards or something like that. But now, like with Jaguar Land Rover, we're talking about $5 billion at least in losses. Co-op says cyber attack cost them $206 million in lost sales, and that's a story by Charlotte Edwards from the BBC News. And Co-op Group says that they're set to take $120 million. Oh, and these are pounds sterling both. 206 million pounds sterling, and then for Co-op Group, 120 million pound sterling full year earnings hit from that cyber attack, and that's from Holly Williams for The Standard.
Yes. So I think that's you mentioned Ponemon, so it's time to bring up that photo.
Trigger
if you're
word.
looking at this on the YouTube, you're gonna see a picture of my good friend Jay Jacobs, the co-founder of Scientia Institute, and now actually at Empirical Security, a new startup that he's working on Ed Bellis and Michael Reutman, formerly from Kenna Security, on the vulnerability management space. So. And he used to carry around a sticker on his phone whenever he went like to Black Hat, etc., saying "Friends don't let friends cite Ponemon." And there's an amazing talk that I highly recommend from Beside San Francisco, 2015. That's when I met Tony Martin Vague, which up until very recently was running risk management at Netflix, and is about to publish a book. So keep an eye out for that. He's awesome. He's going to publish a book. He knows what he's talking about. So you want to read that book. But this idea of the cost per breach is just wrong in so many ways that I usually joke. And then again, I know they're probably hardworking, honest, well-intentioned people at the Ponemon Institute, but it's just like statistical malpractice, to quote Ponemon. The cost per record analysis is just completely flawed. It's based on a survey, not on actual measurements of losses, at least on the early versions it was. So it's about people's perceptions of losses, not actual losses as measured in any objective way. And the first thing I want to say is that this focus on the cost per record, right, brings me back to something that on the CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, we here in information security tend to overvalue the importance of confidentiality, whereas most um, business people will tell you it's availability all day, every day.
Yeah.
And if you look at those losses from Jaguar Land Rover and from those two retailers, co-op or retail related companies, co-op, I think supplier to retailers, not a retailer themselves. I might be wrong about that, but Marks and Spencer's is definitely a retailer.
They're a retailer. Yeah.
Oh, they're a retailer. Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
like groceries, I believe. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, and it's lost revenue, and Jaguar Land Rover actually has a slightly less bad time than the retailers, because the retailers, if you want to buy lettuce, if you want to buy milk, and your retailer is down, just go to their competitor across the street and you buy the same. So you're never going to go back and buy that same left.
Yeah.
Like they've lost
You
that
just
money.
get used to going to that new, yeah.
Even if
When you get in the
next-
car, your brain just, that path is kind of cemented in your brain, and you just go to the same one that you've been going to, right? It's really hard to win those customers back. I agree.
If you buy groceries every week, if that week, instead of going to co-op, you went to someone else, that money will never come back, right? Next week, you might go back to buying a co-op, but that week's worth of money just went to your competitor and that's it. Jaguar Land Rover, like cars are not things people buy every week. If they have to wait a few months because they really want that Range Rover, right? Or they already ordered it and now it's delayed, because sometimes you buy cars and they schedule the delivery, right? You sometimes buy cars months in advance, especially for buying like a brand new car. So for Jaguar Land Rover, a significant chunk of their lost revenue is probably just deferred revenue, right? Which is not at all the case for retailers, where the losses are much more concrete. But that's the point, right? The implications for availability are much greater, and we tend to fetishize confidentiality. I blame the historical beginnings of information security, like on the armed forces, and their concerns about and the intelligence community and their concerns around secrecy, which are much more pronounced than in business. In business, availability is king. So that's the first thing that I right off the bat. If you're talking about cost per records, what you're talking about is the court of records being leaked, being stolen. You're concerned about confidentiality. And that's just one dimension, and not even the most important one for most businesses. Right. So that's the thing that I find fascinating here. The other thing I want to say about that is that talking to cyber insurers, when they pay out, the vast majority of the money goes into the FIR, like digital forensics and incident response, and recovery costs, and not so much on the losses because of credit protection or communicate. Like that's what really impacts you, is getting things up and running again, right? And that has very little relation to the number of records, and everything to do with the size of complexity of the company that got breached and its IT infrastructure, right? You can have a very complex system, a very complex hack, where maybe 10 records were compromised. But if it's a huge company spanning multiple locations with lots of complex technologies, doing IR on one of those environments is super expensive, super complicated, super long. Recovering one of those environments, if it's ransomware, super complicated. And it's very independent of the number of the amount of PII that was leaked. Right. So I just wanted to plant that flag here and let you comment on it.
Yeah.
But I feel like just on a conceptual level, this is misguided before I even get to the math. And I want to get to the math.
Yeah. Well, and it's I think in this current landscape where the nature of attacks have shifted and they're not stealing data and trying to get paid off of individual records on the black market, right? Selling payment information, credit cards, people's identities and things like that. Like that still happens. There's still a black market for that stuff, but it's just not the focus anymore. So it was a very fallible way of measuring it in the first place. You know, it was focused entirely just on what was being stolen, as if there was no other way for cyber criminals to make money off of breaches here. So it was yeah, it was not a good framework, not a good approach to measuring this stuff. And what I'm kind of interested in here, and this kind of takes us into the next story here, but given that this has shifted, that cyber attacks are targeting the operations of organizations, do you see a shift in how businesses interact with the cybersecurity team, the risk management folks, third-party risk management folks? Like, are they seen different in the organization now? Is this, I'm sure they can relate a lot more to the loss prevention folks at this point. I think we've gotten to a point, like early on, we were thinking, I think a lot of security professionals were thinking that breaches and attacks were something that needed to be eradicated, right? Whereas the loss prevention folks, dealing with theft and shrink and stuff like that, are like, oh, that's nice. Yeah, good luck with that. And maybe are we at a point now where, yeah, we expect 4% of revenue to be lost through regular breaches these days.
The way I see information security coming closer to the business is in some more mature, some more online, like more modern banks or online retailers, that sometimes the CISOs are also accumulating fraud prevention and fraud detection, because there's a
Yeah,
lot of machinery and
I've
a
seen
lot of
that also.
knowledge, a lot of discipline and processes that can be shared among those two disciplines. So again, for fraud, confidentiality plays a role, because if you have like PII being leaked, then people can impersonate your customer and do fraud like this. Problem is sometimes confidential information is shared over there and then used over here, and not necessarily protecting the confidentiality of the data you control is a problem. Like someone can steal data from a retailer and then use that PII to impersonate people at a bank. So the bank being very good at doing confidentiality protection does not mean that it will not be hurt by a confidentiality issue. It's just someone else's confidentiality issue that they don't even have a relationship with. But that's the thing I've seen. I still feel like business continuity planning, which is the thing that should be of concern, is not something I see being taken into account heavily by TPCRM professionals. As a vendor to large banks, there are contractual clauses saying you need to have a disaster recovery plan. Do you know how many times people asked for my disaster recovery plan doing a third-party due diligence? None.
Yeah,
They have a
really.
clause saying you need to
Wow.
have it. You have to present it upon request. How many times did they actually request it? None. So
Yeah,
TPCRM teams should do two things. They should be concerned about not only the security against being hacked of their third parties, but also how redundant is their architecture, how resistant to being offline they are. Of course, ransomware
yeah,
makes being hacked equal being unavailable, right? But that's not the only way you can become unavailable. CrowdStrike comes to mind, or causing
yeah, for sure.
unavailability, right?
Yeah, resilience. What we're talking about here is, what a lot of people would use the blanket term resilience, the resiliency of
And
the business.
And also, there's a lot of planning that can be done on the first party side to say, how resilient am I when my first party is unavailable, right? Do I
Yeah,
have the business
goes in
continuity
both
planning
directions. Mm-hmm.
on my end? So if this third party goes away, what happens? Again, think of the airlines and the airports in Europe recently when Collins Aerospace had the self check-in systems went offline, and the airlines didn't have enough people to do the manual processes. The flights got delayed, lots of chaos ensued. They did have some planning, but it clearly still created a huge problem. So how do you prepare for that? Not easy, but that's the stuff you need to like. It's not enough to have the SLA for availability on the contracts, do you actually check that they are able to meet that SLA, that they have an infrastructure, they have backups, that they have redundancies to do it? Very few questions being asked about this on TPCRM, as far as I'm concerned. Again, because we're more concerned with being hacked than we are with availability. And I think that is due a shift on most TPCRM programs I've came in contact with.
And that kind of brings us to our fourth story here. Lots of great examples here. I'm kind of wondering if we're going to see, new regulation here. But certainly, Jaguar Land Rover, Collins Aerospace, when you identify a single point of failure, that can stop society from, or 10% of your country's workforce from going to work and collecting a paycheck. When there's an impact to an entire vertical sector or to a large part of society, people can't travel via air anymore, even if it's only for a week. Like that level of disruption, I would think government would want to step in and say, okay, there's going to be new requirements for these organizations we've identified that can just stop the cogs of society, of things from moving and functioning here. And I've got two stories here, Maya Davies and Mitchell Labiak for BBC News. And it's just a story of Heathrow, talking about disruption after that Collins Aerospace cyber attack. And then I've got another one here from this guy is a CISO at a security vendor, Loris Gutik. And I disagree with a lot in his, he's proposing a replacement for the CIA triad. I don't think it's a very well thought out replacement. For example, there's no, in his replacement framework, there is no confidentiality, doesn't exist in his replacement. But what he does suggest is kind of separating the way we think about security into technical controls, trying to prevent being hacked, compliance and regulation into a second layer, and then the third layer being societal impact and sector impact, which got me thinking, and that's actually the reason I included this fourth story here about whether or not third-party risk management, DRBCP, folks who are concerned with the resilience of the business and the organization need to start thinking about this. Our government's going to start regulating this.
Yeah, it's an interesting take. I think the way that this article was built, I think already started out to with the left foot here, because it presents a strawman definition as if the CIA triad was the guide, the mental model that every CISO is using to decide what to protect, how to
Right.
protect. And that's not how any
That,
CISO operates, how any security
that's not how
team
this works.
operates. It's this just
It's just a
simply
tool.
not how this. It's
Yeah.
just a conceptual framework for the properties of information that we're trying to protect, right? So,
Mm.
and they're completely orthogonal to each other, or mostly orthogonal to each other. And so it's an interesting way to classify impacts, to classify, um, like when I have an incident, what properties of the information I was protecting, because it's information security, were compromised. But defining how you're going to operate your program is much more complicated than that. So the way he framed it didn't need to be this way. You could say, hey, I'm trying to figure out the more dimensions that we have to be concerned about, or I'm proposing a complementary framework, right? That's not the way the article was written. I think that's um, uh, fortunate. Uh, Having said that, he mentions security controls and processes, compliance and regulations. Those things are not orthogonal to each other, right? A lot of compliance and regulations is mandating a minimum level of security controls, and is mandating the existence of certain security processes and the minimal characteristics that they have to have. So saying that these are like the three legs of my framework already, I think, breaks immediately, because those things
Mm.
are just compliance and regulations typically, again, are what they're doing as far as information security is concerned, is defining a baseline for those things, right? Can say they're very prescriptive or very vague, but that's what those regulations are saying as far as information security is concerned, right? It says privacy has to be taken into concern. Sure, privacy is a different discipline. It's not information security. They have an intersection there when you talk about the confidentiality and integrity of some data, particularly PII, right, for personally identifiable information, but they are not the same thing. And privacy has other requirements like consent management that are not at all part of classic information security. So I think he was conflating a lot of concepts there. Uh, and the main thing I wanted to talk about here, because I do believe you are right, societal and sector impact is important, and it has a big relation to third-party cyber risk management, right? So, but the thing I would raise is you have to manage the risks that impact you as an entity. So if we are talking here to enterprise folks, right? So you have to manage the risks that impact your company, right? So of course, if there's a failure of something like a power utility that it can impact your company, even if you're not directly their customer, so it's not classical TPCRM, that has to go into your DRP planning. Like if the employees can get to work because public transport failed, they're not a vendor that you can do an audit on, right? So that falls into disaster recovery planning. But there's a lot more that we could do in TPCRM to find what we call concentration risk. I've had a conversation recently with a bank. They had a critical process that they were doing business process outsourcing for. And they said, in this particular case, there's always a trade-off in doing what I'm about to say. But they decided I'm going to have two separate vendors to do outsourcing of the same process, because if one of them fails or is ransomware or whatever it is, I can continue operating at least with some capacity with the other one, right? And then they figure out that both vendors are using the same SaaS solution to provide those services.
Oh no. Oh,
And
wow.
so the
You
concentration
try to
risk
do the
was
right thing.
right. And so what they did was, which I found was super interesting, they called us their customer, right? And they were using our product to monitor the security of those two BPOs. And then they said, we're going to get those two BPOs in the same room as that SaaS provider. And we're going to start doing TPCRM on that SaaS provider as well, even though we ourselves don't have a contract with them, right? So
Yeah.
that's fourth party risk management. And that's great. So I don't see enough of that.
And you may not even know that, right? You may not
Yes.
even be in a position to know of that
Yes.
common single point of failure behind what you think is a diversification of risk, right?
So unless you're actually looking for that information, you're not going to find it. So the same way
Yeah.
that I don't think a lot of TPCRM programs are looking for availability issues, a lot of TPCRM programs are not looking for that kind of risk concentration across the board. Um, but then I would draw a line on like societal risk, because it's the job of regulators and the government to look at societal risk. Like it's not up to a single company to say I'm going to protect the entire country, right? Like this company has little
Yeah.
impact on me, but it has a societal risk. Now I have to do something about it. So that's the other way in which this framework I think is misleading, because it might lead organizations to invest time and money into things that don't directly impact them. It's not their purview, right? It's not reasonable to expect them to spend their shareholders' money, right, on something that is not directly under their responsibility. And I want to give an example of this, which came up in my past. I'm sorry if that brings you flashbacks, Adrian. I'm going to talk about PCI. You and I
It
were
probably will.
tortured
Yeah.
by PCI as children or something. But so I usually got a lot of complaints from merchants because I was a QSA, right? You were actually a processor, if I remember correctly, right? But I was a QSA
Both.
and was okay. I was you were a
Yeah.
QSA as well. Okay. So when
Not
I
at the
was a
same
Q,
time, but yeah, both.
yes, that wouldn't be allowed probably. But so the being a QSA, I heard especially from mid to smaller size merchants saying, Jesus, like all of these controls, I don't need all this. I don't have that much risk, right? And I said,
Mhm.
you don't have that much risk. You don't represent that much risk to yourself, but you might
Mhm.
represent a huge risk to the system. So here's the thing. A company might be small, they might have a small amount of revenue. So even in the worst case scenario, the loss that they incur might be small. But
Mhm.
they can be the gateway through which attackers steal a large amount of money and then generate huge losses to a lot of
We
other players in the ecosystem and
last
put the
couple of
entire
months we
system
talked
in
about
change.
that. Yeah, the ones in Brazil, right? You know, we talked about these
Exactly.
companies like nobody even knows the name of these companies, but they were the ones targeted, and you know, millions and millions of reais were stolen through them.
So if you're proposing a framework for how CISOs need to think on how to do their jobs for securing their companies, right? They should be concerned with the things that impact their companies. And it's up to a regulator, or in the case of PCI, the credit card brands, to think what are the risks on my purview and how do I get the people
Yeah,
in my uh, um, circle here, in my industry, and the people I can influence to have the appropriate level of controls for what I'm responsible for. And that
yeah,
actually is a good image for what TPCRM is. You're going to be dealing every day
mhm.
with vendors that are much smaller than you, that if they do
And
the risk assessment based on their own needs, they're going to have the need for much fewer controls than what you need as a larger company that is entrusting them with data that can bite you much harder than it will bite them, right?
yeah,
So,
and PCI was designed for this, right? Like as a merchant, you had to take over 1 million transactions on one card brand per year to qualify for requiring an outside assessor. Underneath that, you could self assess. But for service providers, that threshold was much lower because of what you're saying. Because service providers could be in this kind of single point of failure uh, point within the system. And also data centers, your data center example, like if you want to be a tier whatever data center, you can't have power from a single utility, right? You get to have power source from multiple different utilities. You got to have internet connections through multiple different, a single backhoe shouldn't take down a tier whatever data center. And I forget what all the tiers are, but yeah. So we do
so
have some of this, in certifications and regulations right now. But yeah, I wonder if we'll see government step in a bit more for these companies that are a risk to an entire GDP, maybe.
and before we close, a final comment on this. So there's this economic concept of a negative externality. There's a situation where
Mm-hmm.
you make a decision, but depending on the decision you make, you don't incur losses, but you can impose losses on others, and you're going to
Yeah,
maximize what's best for you, right? So if you're proposing a framework that CISOs need to operate under, they need to maximize their own results. And the concern about the only rational way to deal with with negative externalities is with regulation, either self-regulation of a market like PCI DSS, what it represents, or actual regulation, like from a government or a regulator of some kind that has like legal power to regulate something. Otherwise, and again, that's a confusion I saw this proposed framework make. But again, I think it's interesting to think about those things because this is going to come up in conversation with third parties, and you can remind them of that. I know these controls sound excessive. If you were doing business with your own data, absolutely they would be excessive, but you're not doing business with your data. You're doing business with my data. You're doing business with
right.
my process. And these controls are necessary for me. So instead of thinking that they are excessive, remember, I have to protect me from my risk that I'm going to incur because of you, because I'm outsourcing to you, right? So
Yeah,
that's remembering who the risk impact is and that it is different from who implements the controls is the thing that is missed and is often missed in the conversations
mhm.
about TPCRM. And that generates a lot of friction between first and third parties, that this is not spelled out. This is not said out loud because it
Yeah.
needs to be.
And we do need to wrap up here. We're out of time, but if anybody wants some really good examples, especially in the IT world of companies that kind of qualify as small, but like at the very bottom of the XKCD stack, registrars. We've seen a lot of attacks on registrars, who are managing, the websites, domains, TLDs, for entire TLDs. When they get hacked, it's really, really bad. And it might be an 18-person business, right?
Certificate authorities.
Yeah, certificate authorities, right? Yeah, because usually certificate authorities are also registrars. Like they usually do a bunch of things. They may even do some hosting or something like that. But yeah, there have been some DigiCert. Look up DigiCert. There have been some bad ones over the years. That Romanian CA that just got kind of demoted, I guess, after creating 1.1.1 certificates.
That was not nice.
All right, that's all we've got for this month. Alexandre, thank you so much for joining me today. I feel like we covered some really interesting kind of foundational stuff in this one, rather than just specific stories.
This was one of the most interesting. So let's see what people think about it.
Yeah. If you liked what you heard and you're on a platform where you can like, subscribe, or leave a comment, please do so. We'd love to get your feedback. Stay safe and stay vigilant, and we'll see you again next month.